Hey everyone, today we're talking with Andy Schectman, who's from Miles Franklin. It's him and his dad's business. He runs it now. Boy, oh boy, this is going to be a fascinating conversation. If you felt confused, like what's happening in the world, does it just seem things are off? And if you could look at things logically, decisions being made at macroeconomic levels, or even like geopolitically, this is going to be the conversation for you. The amount of wealth of information and knowledge, and the way that Andy explains this, put it this way, the cookie's going to come together. So let's go jump in and talk to Andy and find out what he has to say. Good morning, Andy. It's great to finally meet you. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, and it's great to get someone whose depth of knowledge on gold is startling, as well as just the concept of people going, I want to make money, I want to invest in things, and then wealth. I love the take that you have on that as well. So let's just dive into Miles Franklin, the story of Miles Franklin, and how you got to where you're at today.
Well, it's good to meet you too, Andrew. And I should probably not have much of a problem remembering your name these days. I saw a quote the other day. Someone said, "I remember '80s music lyrics better than why I went into the kitchen," and it's kind of interesting. You know, I'm that way too. A lot of things. I'm filled with a lot of useless knowledge, but I'll
Same
remember
here.
that one. Anyways, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, my company, Miles Franklin, my father's middle name is Miles, and his best friend who lent us $60,000 in 1989 to start this company on a wing and a prayer in a one-room office the size of a closet. His last name is Franklin. We were the least likely cast of characters to have ever gotten to where we are. And you know, you and I were talking a little bit. You mentioned the way that I look at gold in terms of wealth, and it's true. And I think it's important when people, especially those who have never heard my perspective on things, to know the way that I look at it. To me, it's not an investment. When I started this company with my dad, I was barely 20. And he said to me, "Look, you know, I'm not going to let you make the same mistakes that I made as a young man. You will buy some gold or silver every 2 weeks when you get paid, period, or I'll fire you." Okay, that's the only rule. I can deal with that. I've owned the company pretty much outright for over 2 decades. He's still my partner, so to speak, although he's been retired for over 20 years. And but he is certainly a sounding board, but he won't fire me any longer. But I've honored my promise to him, which I, honest to God, believe is the best gift I've ever been given, the gift of learning to pay myself first, the gift of allowing me the ability to leave the rat race by allowing the laws of compounding to work for me instead of against me. And you know, over time, markets do work, and over time, the laws of compounding are amazing, not just in interest compounding, but in time compounding. And for 34 years, every 2 weeks, I've never ever missed a 2 week period or chance to add some gold and silver to my portfolio, which I do not view as an investment. It is wealth that has outlived 2 world wars and German hyperinflation and the Great Depression and every pandemic. It is wealth that I hope I never need to use. If I do, I'm damn glad I have it. And it doesn't just need to be for an emergency, the way that everyone always paints it in a picture of being this catastrophe hedge. Yeah, sure, it's that, but it'll also, I believe, be dry powder for an opportunity as the dust settles through all the chaos that we find ourselves in the midst of. It's dry powder that would allow me opportunities when others who are fully invested in dollars and traditional assets may not have the ability to do so. And if I don't need it, I give it to my children. And there are very few things that you can pass on to your children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews or even a charity that have not only a tremendous amount of intrinsic value, but in most cases, a good deal of sentimental value as well. And in the year 3000, when the bills that we call money in our wallets are hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian as an example of what was, I know that gold and silver will still have value the way it did 5,000 years ago. So that is the way I look at it. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't aware of its potential. I mean, here we are today. Gold's up $30 and silver's up $1, and you know, silver's up 40% since February. And you know, I'm keenly aware of it, but I look at it as a far better substitute in holding wealth than dollars. And if you go back to 1971, since the day we went off the gold standard, it has outpaced the CPI, the level of inflation, which, you know, that says something. It's doing its job. It is retaining purchasing power. And there's numerous examples of that going all the way back to Roman times. But the bottom line is gold and silver are wealth. If you own enough of it, you will be wealthy. But that's not why you buy it. You buy it because it's wealth that has outlived everything the world's ever thrown at it. And I think it will continue to do so.
And that's the fascinating part, is that I remember whether when I was at Merrill Lynch or another company, there's always be regarding technology, but this time it's different. No, but this time it's different. And you could say that for thousands of years as, well, wait a second, we have this new theory about economics. It's different. We're going to use money in a new way. It's different. It always comes back, certainly as from the higher ups, from like Federal Reserves, from country level, they buy gold. And then when you try and experiment some other way, it still comes back to the common sense. What physical asset do you have that has wealth? And I think whether it's, and we can like crypto and Bitcoin, everything else that has a place, there's an argument for the asset. Gold, you can't take it away. And there isn't anything I've seen today that says, well, it's different today.
I'll tell you,
gold.
I think, and this is kind of flipping the equation, where I see things being different today is not in what gold represents, is not in even really about gold. What I see different today is the United States. I see a country that has lost its bearing, a country that used to be defined by its laws and its electoral system, its judicial system. We have questioning of the validity of the electoral system. We have a question of the validity of the judicial system. We have a question of the validity of the sanity and the wisdom of open borders and allowing 12 million people in this country illegally. We have questioning of, what did make this country great? Was it its respecting of authority? Was it respecting the nuclear family? Was it respecting a religion? All of these things that were so important to this country have been tossed by the wayside, it seems. And we are a country that is different in the respect of, I think, the way not only that a lot of people view this country, but also the people across the globe. And I think it is affecting the increasing de-dollarization and de-treasurization, because if all of the mismanagement of the currency was met with, well, they have very, very sound elections. They have the great immigration policy. They have laws where people have flown across or sailed across an ocean on inner tubes tied with string to leave authoritarian regimes to find justice. And Lady Liberty holding the scales of justice blindfolded. I mean, suspend what side of the aisle you're on. Do you think Trump and Biden have been treated the same? The Biden family and the Trump family, have they been treated the same by the judicial system? Are our elections fair? Was there suspicion in the 2020 elections? And I can go on and on about that. The lawlessness in the cities and the craziness that we have in terms of our addiction to spending, this fiscal policy that's creating $1 trillion in debt every 100 days. It took 200 years to do that the first time. So there are some things that are different, but what isn't different is what gold represents. It's wealth. And when you see that how full circle things have come, it's been wealth since the Bible. But here in 2024, the first quarter of the year, the central banks bought more than any first quarter in history, surpassing 2023 first quarter, which was the most in any time in history. And when you look at the central banks, which are the most well-informed traders in the world, let alone the wealthiest, they're buying gold and silver and commodities at a level the world has never seen before, especially gold. And what is gold? How many people know that the Bank of International Settlements reclassified it as a Tier 1 reserve asset? And next to US dollars and treasuries, central banks, those are the only Tier 1 assets that's their world, right? It's a riskless asset. And maybe this has something to do with the Bundesbank of Germany and the Dutch National Bank and the Bank of Austria, Hungary, Turkey, the Polish National Bank, the Czech National Bank, all repatriating their gold from the New York Fed. And then there has been recently a tremendous drive out of Africa and the Middle East countries are repatriating their gold again. And this time it took a little while to find out. In fact, even Senator Mooney from West Virginia asked for a Freedom of Information Act to tell us which of the countries were pulling their money out. But indeed, there is a whole bunch of countries, including Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Senegal, Cameroon, Algeria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, all pulling their gold back from the Federal Reserve in New York, because what gold represents, to your point about confiscation, cannot be confiscated from these countries. It cannot be sanctioned the way that the Treasury market and the dollars can. And going around the world, and in a very hypocritical way, at least the way they think it's hypocritical, when we go in and say to China, you can't give any money to Russia. You can be friends with them, Janet Yellen said. Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. But you give any money to the Russian war machine, we will sanction your banks, your companies, and even Beijing. Forget about the fact that we've given $200 billion to the Ukraine with no congressional oversight. We're the world reserve currency. We can do that. And so the world is pushing back against the hegemony, the hypocrisy, and the stupidity of what we're allowing to happen in this country. So if it were just that mismanagement, if it was just that, I think the world would overlook it, thinking that we had our act together. But I think there are a lot of people out there, a lot of countries who are saying, what the hell's going on in that country? And it's increasing the speed at which we see massive de-dollarization and de-treasurization, and they're doing that with gold, and primarily with gold and with oil, and to a lesser extent, silver at the same time.
It's fascinating because you've touched on a whole bunch of things I couldn't agree more with. I mean, to me, when you're looking at it, it becomes obvious. I always, you liken it to, even when you speak to an individual, they could be saying one thing, but you want to see what they're doing. So there's big talk about XYZ, the best economy in the world. Well, what's actually happening? What are they doing? Well, you see all these foreign governments buying gold. That isn't a big mainstream narrative. Should we be concerned? They won't even talk about it. It's people like yourself that are getting the message out to say, this is happening. Why isn't CNN wildly saying what's happening? There is this de-dollarization. And in fact, some people, even a couple of years ago, when I'd talk about BRICS, they'd go, it's an interesting theory. It's just a kind of a club, and these people don't even get along all that well. And it's like, well, sometimes a friend of my friend is my enemy. You don't have to be best friends with India and China to get along, to go, we've been bullied over here a bit, and we don't know what's happening with the US. It's I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. It's chaos in the West right now. And we can't seem to see what's up and down, what's happening. And that has opened on all the levels, that gap to go, maybe we do move ahead with this. I mean, I tell me, like 10, 20 years ago, if you said any country even hinted at, we're going to come off the US dollar, I would imagine they're going to get hammered. That's not going to happen. Now it's like, oh, maybe it's happening.
Well, and to your point, I started talking about this in 2019. I've done thousands of YouTube videos, and they're all out there. Speaking of this, screaming about it in 2019, 20, and 2021, thousands of videos. People told me I was nuts, but I've been right. And that's the scariest thing of all. I have called all of this, and I'm not saying I'm a soothsayer. I mean, I've been doing this for 34 years, and a lot of the things that I have talked about as a company have been right, but never when I thought it would happen, because the things that we talk about are rooted in economics, mathematics, with a sprinkling of old school logic. They typically tend to come true, but never when we thought. The acceleration of the things that I've been talking about with BRICS and the petrodollar is startling to me. Most people don't even know what makes the dollar the world reserve currency. It used to be backed by gold, and until 1971, when Charles de Gaulle from France started to call our bluff, realizing we were printing more dollars than we had gold backing the dollar, because at the end of World War II, we told the world, look, you take our dollars, we'll exchange them back to governments, not people, because it was illegal to hold gold in the United States from 33 to 74. But they said, look, you hold our dollars, it will be the world reserve currency, and we will always exchange them at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce for gold. So de Gaulle said, give us back our gold. He sent warships to New York Harbor filled with gold. Give us the gold. We want it. And we did, and bled down over half the gold over a period of 2 years. It was held at the Fed, or at the Fort Knox, and lo and behold, Nixon closed the gold window. But it was 2 years later that Henry Kissinger was dispatched to Saudi Arabia and struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom. We'll protect you, but for that protection, you and by extension, OPEC will value oil in dollars globally and put the residual income into US treasuries. And it's been that way for 50 years. Now, the fact that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia just recently said China was our most important trading partner in 2023, and for the next 50 years, well, that should be startling to people. Those words were chosen carefully. And if you wanted to undermine the dollar hegemony, the fact that we protect the Saudi kingdom, that the petrodollar is very important to us, the last thing you would do is sign an executive order to go green and tell Saudi Arabia, listen, thanks, guys, we're going green, and then weaponize the dollar against countries who do not align ideologically with us, like Iraq, like Iran, like Russia. And, you know, look at the case of Iraq. We invaded them 20 years ago. We are still sanctioning 14 of their banks and still occupying their country. And they made $95 billion in oil revenue last year. They're not allowed to direct it. It's held at the New York Fed, right? They asked for $1 billion at the end of 23. We said, not a good time, guys. So what did they do? They have made trading in dollars illegal. If you own a company and trade in dollars, you go to prison. They'll take your business. They are in the process of kicking Western coalition forces out of the country. They have formally applied to BRICS, along with 36 other countries on top of the 10 that's already there. 36 other countries have formally applied. And as of January 1, they have all dollar bills that were green dollar bills. They're out of the country. The banks don't hold them anymore. So we have weaponized the dollar and the treasury market. We have told the world, including Saudi Arabia, that we are going green. And what has Saudi Arabia done? Well, they've joined the BRICS. They have formally applied to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, along with Iran, which is, and many other countries, by the way, which is the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. Every single OPEC country is on the Belt Road Initiative. The Chinese Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history. Every OPEC country is there. Every OPEC country, did I say that? Every OPEC country is on the Belt Road, the largest infrastructure project in human history. When you put together the Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the BRICS, you're talking 85 to 90% of human population. But they have also told the world, including at Davos, at the World Bank meeting, that, or the World Economic Forum meeting, whatever the heck it was, we're open to taking other currencies for oil. And that's what you see happening right now. And all of these commodities are being sold in local currencies right now. Too much emphasis was put on the common settlement currency, which will happen. Sergei Glaznev, the Russian finance minister, promised us it's going to happen, and it will, and it may happen right away. It's going to be a basket of currencies and a basket of commodities. What commodity? Well, probably gold, the only other tier one reserve asset. But it's happening. But instead, chipping away at the dollar's value is done in two ways. One, they trade in local currencies. China, as an example, just canceled huge wheat contracts with Australia and the United States and has replaced it with Russia, paying for it in yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. What is gold? The only other tier one asset that we know will be backing a new system. So Russia sells its wheat to China for yuan, converts it into the only other tier one asset in the world, gold. Saudi Arabia selling its oil to China for yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold. China buying from Brazil, corn and soybeans, paying for it in yuan, immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Iran awarding China a huge contract to modernize their biggest airport, paying for it in oil. What is happening is that the dollar is being usurped by local currencies for settlement that chips away at the settlement value of the dollar. And gold and oil, and to a lesser degree, other commodities like silver, are being used to replace the treasury market, which cannot be confiscated, which cannot be sanctioned, and which, if you look at gold, go back to 2000, it has massively outperformed the bond market, massively. Mm-hmm. And it can't be sanctioned, and it can't be confiscated, and it can't be weaponized, and there is no default risk. So these things are happening right out from underneath us, and the public has no idea. They can't get out of the way of what the media doesn't tell them is coming. So you're right. It's a scary time, but I think it is just beginning. And I can show you a lot of things here that will support what I'm saying, showing how it's really accelerating right now.
And it's funny because they'll hint at it, say even a CNN or Reuters will put out, Russia's getting around sending copper to China. They're getting around doing, and then they go, what? Well, we're going to put tighter sanctions on you. And they'll say these things, but the biggest frustration beyond that is this notion of, yeah, we're going green. You go, okay, fine. The best thing if you were to go green would be to keep on doing oil and gas and convince China, India, Germany to get off coal, use liquid natural gas for the foreseeable future. Your emissions would drop astoundingly lower just doing that. But they take that off the table, and you scratch your head going, that's an immediate, if you were worried about carbon emissions, that would have an immediate take. It would take a long time to get that process going. And if you still wanted to transition, it gives you time to transition. But even that, there's been more oil and gas in the last Biden administration, when you'd think, if you ask the average person, they go, oh, no, we've stopped doing any of it. It has to go forward, because even by 2050, maybe we use 20% less, maybe, if they got it all right. But that's a maybe. It's going to be there to stay.
Well, and it leads me, it makes me feel a lot of what is going on. And as controversial as this sounds, that it's being done by design. I mean, I don't know how many of your listeners have seen this moronic Jared Bernstein video that's been going around all over the internet, where he can't describe how the U.S. government sells bonds. But this is the lead economic advisor of the United States government. Number one, he has a master's, or he has a degree in music from Columbia University, where he studied the Cloward-Piven theory too. I would bet my life on it. If your listeners don't know what Cloward-Piven theory is, just Google it and read it. It'll blow your mind. You're like, my God, this is happening right now in this country. But he has a master's degree in social work, and this is the lead economic advisor of the United States government, who advocates for losing the world reserve status. That is a privilege we can no longer afford. He's written all sorts of reports on it. The most famous one being Dethrone King Dollar, where he advocates and says it's a privilege we can't afford because of the imbalances and distortions in trade and balance of settlement that it creates. So if you wanted to do that, I can't think of a better way to do it than to tell the Saudis and the rest of OPEC and the rest of the world, hey guys, we're going green. I mean, there'd be a better way to do it. Like, yeah, we're still going to continue to use oil, but we're going to do all we can to clean up emissions, and we're going to really work on this. But no, we're going green by 2050. 80% of, they say, 80% of all government emissions will be gone. Anything that the government uses will be gone by 2050, 50% by 2030. So, we're going green. We don't need oil anymore. And then weaponize the dollar and the treasury market against, half the Southern Hemisphere, where these countries are like, wow, you don't align ideologically, they're going to take your funds. Janet Yellen, our brain dead Treasury Secretary, goes into Brazil in the backyard of Russia in a charter BRICS member and says, you guys, just sanctioning the Russian assets isn't enough. We need to confiscate them and use them to fund the Ukraine for munitions and to rebuild the country. Really? So you can go in and confiscate assets of another country you're in the middle of a war with because you don't align. We can give the Ukraine $200 billion with no congressional oversight, but tell China if they give them 1 penny, they're allies in BRICS, the C and the R, right? You give them 1 penny that goes to the war machine, we're gonna sanction you across the board, from your banks to Beijing and everything in between. The hypocrisy that creates is off the charts. Well, this is Jared Bernstein's main theory. He wants to lose the reserve status. And then from the too stupid to be stupid category, look at what we're doing in the country: the open borders, the lawlessness, the elections, the judicial system, the wokeness, the departure from everything that this country once stood for. And you have to ask yourself, is that lost on the rest of the world? Why would they do this? Yeah. That's the question. Why? Well, look, we're a country that is massively indebted. We have a $34 trillion debt. Medicare Part B is over $90 trillion underfunded. 90. Social Security, 77 trillion. Medicare Part D, the prescription side, 22 trillion. A trillion seconds ago, 31,688 years ago. We're $200 trillion in the hole. And if you Google what is the government's largest asset, they have a $5 trillion balance sheet. That's it. The largest asset is student debt of 1.6 trillion. So when our knucklehead president tries to give away a few billion to get reelected, it's a drop in the bucket, but it is our largest asset. So we are broke, we are insolvent, we will never be able to repay this debt burden. So, people have always said, what is the Fed have, what are their choices? They can inflate or they can default. Well, how about find a villain? And that would be Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC for how could they do it to us? Because if what Jared Bernstein does and what we are doing around the globe and here make people say, look, thank you for the 50 years. Remember what the Crown Prince said, for the next 50, China's our most important. Thank you for the memories, you guys. But look, you're going green. So we're not going to take dollars for oil anymore. And bang, like that.
Yeah.
It's all over. And the byproduct of the world who's had to accumulate dollars for 50 years, creating a synthetic demand for the dollar, when that ends and everyone dumps dollars, the hyperinflation that would ensue as those dollars hit our shore would create interest rates to go to the moon. Not something Powell would do. But what is the byproduct of that? Stocks, bonds, real estate, the banking system, and the insurance companies all vaporize if interest rates go to the moon. They're all over leveraged and undercapitalized and all inversely correlated to interest rate rise. Well, now you come in and say, well, now what? We'll have no fear. Number two is here. That's Lael Brainerd. And she is a modern monetary theorist. If Biden wins again, she'll be the head of the Federal Reserve. She was number two there under Powell recently and left to come to the White House to be the number two economic advisor after spending time at the Treasury before being at the Fed. She is a modern monetary theorist. She just ran point in introducing Fed Now, which came out a few months ago, as being piloted by a handful of banks. That's Venmo and Zelle on steroids, backed by the Fed. It will, if it is fully launched, will replace checks and wires with immediate settlement. But she also, when at the Boston Fed, worked with MIT in development of a CBDC. So if the interest rates spike to the moon to pay off or to blow up the 200 trillion in debt and point to a villain that did it to us, have no fear. Lael Brainerd is here with the CBDC. Take it, and you too can be made whole, because no one else wants to take it unless they are forced to.
Yes.
And Andrew, I just keep coming back to the same place. Is it too stupid to be this stupid? I mean, is it planned? Or are politicians just that stupid? And after watching Jared Bernstein on that video that came out a week or two ago, I'm not sure. Is he just that stupid? Or is this whole thing too stupid to be stupid? Is it meant to look that way to reset the system and not fall on the sword for brain dead monetary and fiscal policy of the Fed and the Treasury?
This is the question, because for anyone who has been following, say, some of the miraculous foresight the WF has had on things like, oh, there's going to be a pandemic. Oh, there's going to be things before they happen. They have incredible insight as to how things can happen. They had mentioned a number of times, like even years ago, that the West was going to have to suffer, that their lifestyle that they were used to was not going to be the same. It was going to be changed. And I remember that stuck with me, because I thought, oh boy, this is like a distribution of wealth idea that is the undercurrent I see from their almost everything.
Leveling the global playing field.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We have to pay for our sins, from manifest destiny to whatever else. And now it's time to pay up. That is never lost on me, but most people, once again, don't know it, maybe heard something about it, but it's just a club where people meet and they discuss ideas of this. But when you look at all this and you show this to someone, are the people just not qualified, or is it stupid? Or no, this has got to be designed. To me, it's hard because you're putting on a conspiracy hat, but this looks like it's designed. They're told, just spend as much as you want because we have the solution for you. It's coming.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality. There truly is. And I don't think you have to be particularly astute to see the crumbs that have been laid at our feet. I think what has given me notoriety in this industry is I've been able to take all of those crumbs and piece together a cookie.
Yes.
A cookie that shows what's happening. Because in and of themselves, all the things that we've been talking about here already, and the things that I've talked about over the last 4 years, they're less meaningful until you put them into together into the shape of a cookie. And like, oh my goodness, what?
Yes.
Yeah, it all adds up. So, and I think that it's reaching a stage where it is accelerating. And one of the ways that this is happening, you can see this over the last 60 days, we've seen a 200% increase in activity, average trading volume on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It's now surpassed the New York COMEX as being the second the world's second largest gold trading hub after the London Bullion Market Association. And what we have seen is a tremendous amount of gold that has been shipped eastward to Hong Kong, where there is a Brinks vault in Hong Kong. It is part of COMEX. And the only thing that ever gets delivered there is what's called EFP, exchange for physical. So at the same time, it looks as though HSBC Bank is shorting the hell out of gold and silver right now, and all signs point it to being them on the COMEX. We have seen incredibly large deliveries that end up going to Brinks Hong Kong, which is exchange for physical. So they short the paper price, and then they buy a contract, and in what's called the OTC market, the over-the-counter, they can say, well, I want it delivered to Brinks Hong Kong, physical. I'm going to stand for delivery on these contracts. And that physical gold gets delivered. Then a week ago Friday, 7,560 gold kilobars were shipped out. That's at the time $572 million worth of gold, 243,054 ounces. Who's got that kind of bread? And so it gets sent to Brinks Hong Kong, where I believe it is being trucked to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. They only deal in kilobars. Now, the COMEX primarily deals in 100-ounce bars, but the mini contracts are kilobars. Well, what did they just take possession of? 7,560 kilobars that are sent to Hong Kong in exchange for physical, then would be trucked over to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And the way that these countries are sidestepping sanctions, like I was saying, they trade in their local currencies. In the yuan, let's say, they'll go around, they'll buy up all of these commodities, corn, wheat, soybeans, oil, you name it, and then that yuan holding can be immediately sent back to the Shanghai Gold Exchange and converted into gold. Well, a lot of the gold they appear to be getting comes from the Western exchanges that they're draining using the suppression and the leverage of the Western markets. It's accelerating 200% in the last 60 days. And they are accumulating what is wealth in lieu of U.S. treasuries, because all of that excess used to settle in treasuries, and all of that trade used to settle in dollars. And now you have all of this trade that is settling in local currencies, and instead of going into the treasury market, it's going into gold and oil. And I find it very interesting that the Project M Bridge, which was a technology developed by China and the United Arab Emirates and I think Singapore last year, which is and by the way, UAE just joined the BRICS. It is a cross-border payment system that utilizes a platform that sidesteps SWIFT, so you can't be sanctioned there. The first two trades that were made on that last year in October and December of 23, the first one was a cross-border payment purchase for oil, and the second one was for gold. These are the things that are being remonetized in favor of the U.S. Treasury market and the U.S. dollar. This is the acceleration that we are beginning to see. And I think the world is remonetizing gold, oil, and to a lesser extent, silver and copper. And they are doing that in lieu of treasuries and dollars, which can be sanctioned and inflated and confiscated. And it's happening. And for people to ignore it, look, at the end of macro cycles, especially those cycles that have been, 100 years, where, the 500 years where the West has had supremacy, if you go back and choose other countries, like the United Kingdom and like Portugal and Spain and France, they all ruled the roost for a little bit of time. And now that's coming to an end. And so what is happening is these countries are finding safety in numbers. If you look at the BRICS, who people call it a nothing burger, well, there were 5, now there's 10. Yeah. As it is right now, if you take the BRICS and the Belt Road Initiative, you're talking 85% of human population. You're talking the majority of all commodity production, from rare earths to oil and gas to even wheat. Russia produces more wheat than the West does. You're talking 3 of the 4 largest nuclear arsenals in the world. You're talking the majority of human population, a larger swath of global GDP, the majority of all the shipping lanes in the world, including the Straits of Hormuz and the Red Sea. You're talking a group, an entity that is growing with legitimacy and strength in every capacity. And 36 more countries have formally applied, which we will find out in February or in October, in the big October BRICS meeting, which one of those have actually been approved, on top of 24 or 5 that have informally applied. And it is growing with legitimacy and strength every single day. I think it is just beginning.
So this is interesting too. I mean, all that's fascinating. I'm just going to pick one part out of it because my brain is reeling. Because some of this I hadn't heard, some I had. The acceleration. Do you think, in part, and this kind of leads into the segue of everyone knows we're in chaotic times. We've got a big election coming up. Do you think part of it is like an option on, listen, we got to speed this up just in case? And my argument would be, in part, you have one side that looks at things in a more traditional, whether it's the family, like there's a core set of values that's up for debate in the US. And I'll say the US because that really represents the West for the most part, compared to this new kind of ideology. Do you think part of it is, if one side gets in, like we have to slow down, or we accelerate? Is it anticipation of that election? Like, listen, we need to speed things up and get this further down the road in case, I say, a Trump wins.
I think that God help us if he doesn't win. If he doesn't win, I think this country's in for a really big problem. I mean, it's already bad. This administration has done more to damage this country than any of our foes could have ever have done. And we're like a broken glass thrown against a wall into a million pieces. Good luck trying to put that back together. That's what happens when you shatter your trust globally. But as much as I will tell you that I'm praying that Trump wins, I don't think he can stop it either, because look at what he's saying. He's saying if he gets elected first, he'll devalue the dollar. Well, you have to devalue the dollar. It's the only way to pay off this mountain 200+ trillion in debt through inflation and devaluing it. It's called monetization of the debt. You make it easier to pay off with watered down dollars. But he said another thing that troubled me, and that was, he'll go out and sanction other countries if they try to pull away from using the dollar. No, you can't do that. That's what got us into this problem to begin with. So I think we've already crossed the Rubicon. The question is, can we start to regain credibility and trust? Can we minimize the effect? I think there is a good deal of the world, especially the Southern Hemisphere, that will never trust us again, and probably rightfully so. So I hate to be pessimistic. I got 3 kids, man. My youngest is 17, just turned 17 a few days ago. And I don't want them to grow up in a world that I am frightened by myself as a 53-year-old man. But I don't know. I mean, how do you ever pay off? If a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago, how do you pay off 200 trillion in debt? And how do you pay that off as the interest rates are elevated and continue to go higher, because no one wants to hold our treasuries of any duration? So who buys them then? Well, that would be the Federal Reserve, is the only one stupid enough to do it. So they print money to do it, which creates massive inflation, which leads to higher interest rates. All roads lead to the same place. This is what happens when you screw with Mother Nature. When you mess with interest rates and then on top of it, throw money at it. And when you step on interest rates at the lowest level in history, and then if you take the $6 trillion that we have printed in the past year, if you spent $100 every second of every day, it would take almost 2,000 years to print just the number of dollars that we've spent in the last year. So when you talk about suppressed interest rates and throwing money at things, you create distortions in asset prices, misallocations of capital and resources. When you had zero interest rates forever and easy money, a company could say, yeah, let's expand. Let's R&D this to kingdom come. Let's build another wing. Let's hire 500 people. Let's put offices in every state. Money is cheap. We can borrow money at next to nothing and make it back easy. Let's do it. And then bang, interest rates shoot up, to 500 basis points in a year. And whoa, that changes the environment a lot. And so when you talk about distortions and misallocations and anomalies, it's through suppression of interest rates. And we have created these problems that, look, when you have a country that has lived beyond its means for as long as we have, I think that there are consequences. There are no happy endings when your government and your country has lived beyond its means for generations, and the actions have consequences. And we are a country that no longer produces more than we consume. It's the opposite of that. And that all has consequences. But all these countries that the BRICS, to your point earlier, when people are naysayers, look, in and of themselves, just a few years ago, these countries couldn't stand up against the West. But in unison, in concert, they've become more sophisticated, more wealthy, and more capable of understanding the game that we've been playing, and they're beating us at our own game by, in the case of gold acquisition, suppressing the price on the Western markets and standing for delivery. And now they're even doing something called arbitrage, where in Shanghai right now, the price of silver on the Shanghai Metals Exchange is $3 an ounce higher than it is here in the United States and in London. And so they are enticing any of the traders who have the ability to buy in the West and deliver in the East to do just that, and that will never come back. So yes,
Yeah.
this is all happening, and it's happening at an accelerated pace.
And it's interesting too, because people, the argument, well, if you own the printing press and you can print money, then you've got an advantage. Sure. And you've got the biggest military. Sure. But if you give away your energy, I would argue having the printing press it's still valuable, but it's not as valuable. If you can't back up your country, I would argue almost energy is right up there. And when you disable it, or say, listen, we're going to cut it in half, or we're going to disallow a lot of it, that is just a green light for everyone else to go, oh, great, we can accelerate then.
Too stupid to be stupid. You're right. And the printing press works until people say, why would we ever want to hold that dollar when the printing press is destroying its value and that of the bond market, when they can instead buy gold, which has outperformed the bond market, does not have that risk. In fact, the more they print only strengthens the price of gold. And not only that, doesn't have the sanction or confiscation or default risk. That's why we are seeing a floor under the price of gold and silver, as the people in the West have their head up their rear end. Yeah. People in the West have been selling into this rally. Look at the ETFs. They're falling off at a 45-degree angle.
Yes.
They have been sleeping, chasing, this instant gratification isn't fast enough mentality that everyone has in NVIDIA and Bitcoin. They're not enamored with 9% per year compounding for the past 25 years that gold offers. They want it all, and they want it now, just like Violet in Willy Wonka. I want it all, Daddy. I want it now. Yeah. Well, that's what it is. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. Instead of allowing time and compounding of time and markets to work, they're just biting off their want to, let's just gamble, and I'll put it all into NVIDIA and I'll put it all into Bitcoin, and let's get rich now. Well, that's going to have some serious problems. I think it is the opposite way of looking at things. So as the rest of the world, in particular, Chinese as an example, they continue to hit breakers on their ETFs on the upside. There's so much demand, they have to stop them as we're selling and selling metal into the rally, as the central banks, the most well-informed traders in the world, forget about the wealthiest, which they are, they're most well-informed, buying more than they ever have in history over the last 3 years. Q1 2024, the largest one quarter purchase of metals by central banks in history, surpassing 2023 Q1. The biggest, most influential, wealthiest, and most well-informed traders on the globe are buying it like it's going out of style, as the West is selling. There's a problem here. But if you look at that and say, well, if we believe the nonsense coming out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, these idiots, they lie like hell. They just pulled coffee for this month. Coffee is taken out of the CPI. Because it's up 85% since September, 35% this year, right? They took it out, replaced it with tea. So the inflation is a lie. But if we believe it, if we were to believe it, which we shouldn't, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, pull the L out, it should be the BS. But the BLS says that, okay, we have 3.2 or 3.4% inflation, but you can get 5.5% on a 6-month treasury. That's a positive real return. Yeah. That should kill the price of gold. We have a strong dollar. That should kill the price of gold. We have massive divestment out of the ETFs, and physical market is being sold into the rally. That's kryptonite for gold, all those three together, and yet it continues to go higher and higher and higher and higher, because the central banks and the rest of the world sees what's happening. And the West, our media, doesn't just do a crappy job, they do no job of telling us what's happening. And that's why people can't get out of the way of what they don't see coming, and they are going to be smacked straight in the face by these changes. And how did that happen? Maybe people listening to you and me and others will have a fighting chance.
Yep.
The rest won't.
That's what I wanted. You answered it in a roundabout way, was even if there's hope, and if you look at Canada as well, if we get our guy out here, there's hope. If Trump gets in, there's hope. But it doesn't mean that that things can be fixed, it's going to be a lot of work. So there's a case for gold. It still remains. So the argument would be, well, if Trump wins, maybe gold settles down and then everything will be okay. It's like, well, that might be the narrative for a month, but no, the problem, like maybe like you said, the problem is so insurmountable. It's going to take a drastic change and plan, a kind of a case to set forward that still means, guess what, guys, hold on to that gold.
Well, I'll tell you, the only way I think the Western nations get out of this debt spiral is by revaluing gold. And the interesting thing is, look, right over my shoulder, that's what Roosevelt did. He confiscated this is a $20 gold certificate. And instead of on a $20 bill where it says in God we trust, it says payable to the bearer on demand in gold coin. Here's a $20 gold coin. They were interchangeable, right?
Yes.
Well, he confiscated gold. He paid everyone $20.56. Back then, a nickel would buy you a dozen eggs. So 56 cents, that's a lot for your extra but then he devalued the dollar and gold went up to $35 an ounce, a 40% increase in the value of gold. If you look at every balance sheet on central bank balance sheets, all of them, interestingly enough, do you know what the name of the account is where gold is held on their balance sheet?
No.
The gold revaluation account, it's called. That is the name of it in every single central bank balance sheet. Now, here's how, and you even had just a few months ago, the head of the Dutch National Bank saying, we need to do this. We need to revalue the price of gold. And it would get us out of our debt spiral. Why? If you were to put gold at a really high number, let's say $15,000 an ounce, now your assets are going to offset your liabilities. Just like that, your balance sheet is made whole. Is it that crazy? No, I don't think it is that crazy. In fact, why else would the Bank of International Settlements reclassify gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset? Why would all of these central banks, dozens of them, repatriate their gold from the Bank of England and the New York Fed? Why are the central banks buying gold at a rate the world has never, ever seen before? Why did Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, say a CBDC that is not pegged to something is just fiat? What would be the logical thing to peg it to? The only other tier 1 reserve asset. Why is this happening? Well, I'll tell you why, because I think they will put gold at a level that no one can imagine, maybe $15,000, $20,000 an ounce, and then they will use 10 or 20% of every new currency unit in circulation pegged to an ounce of gold, so that you still have monetary maneuverability if 80% is not pegged, but 20% is. But that 20% gives it a tether, so it can't float away the way that it always has with politicians' ambitions to inflate over austerity, the tough decisions. I really do believe that is what they will do, and it will be a marriage between blockchain technology and gold, because de Gaulle from France proved that convertible currencies convert. And he said, give us back all our gold. Here are your dollars. We don't want that. But if you have blockchain technology with gold that shows the veracity and the immutability and have it audited by independent auditors, you have a fighting chance of gaining.
You know where every gram of gold came from. If it came from a Canadian mine, if a Congo mine, you know exactly where it is. And this is where it's interesting, the crypto blockchain discussion and what can happen.
Right.
And this is fascinating. I mean, this is why I wanted to get you on, because and here's the lead up question. We see things like Costco sold $200 million worth of small gold bars. They sell it quickly. You guys at Miles Franklin, you've done what, $9 billion since origination of the company.
We did $960 million in sales last year, and we're a small family-owned company. And yeah, you know, what Costco did is very impressive. To me, it is indicative of there being latent demand that people don't know about. My biggest issue with those people is what are they going to do when they want to sell it, because Costco won't buy it back.
They're not buying it.
Now you got to figure that one out. But yeah, there's demand out there. And look, I look at gold as wealth. That's why we started out this conversation. It's not about getting wealthy. It is wealth that has outlived everything the world's thrown at it. And yet it's relevant enough to where the central banks are buying it at a level no one's ever seen. And what are the central banks? The most well-informed people in the world, at least in terms of economic policy and the playbook. Like, for example, in 2017, after 6 years of the price of gold going down, it went straight up from 2000 to 2011, every year about 13% per year, and then went down from 11 to 17. In 2017, in the middle of a 6-year bear market, the Bundesbank, the Bank of Turkey, Hungary, Poland, Austria, Czech National Bank, Dutch National, they all said, give us back our gold. And then the next year, those same banks bought more as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined in 2018. And then in 2019, those numbers were up 100%. And then, oh boy, coincidentally, the BIS said, by the way, you guys, gold is now the only other tier one reserve asset next to US dollars and treasuries. Oh, that was a coincidence, or was it? Do the central banks know the playbook? Abso-freaking-lutely they do. They know where this is going. They know what the next chapter is, and it will be a system that will be denominated, as Zoltan Pozar calls it, by commodities and transparency. What is that? Gold and blockchain. Boom, boom, done. Tier one asset, massive accumulation, massive repatriation. Keep putting it together, and you will see that the old system of opaque debt instruments and promises by a broke entity, a terminally declining country, ain't going to be the way it works anymore. We don't want your promises. We don't want your debt instruments, especially if you're going to try and confiscate it from us and sanction us if we don't agree with things, because you know what? We don't agree with the way you're doing things. But yet, that's Janet Yellen saying, China, you give any money to Russia, you can be friends. You give any money, we're going to their war machine. We're going to sanction you, your banks, and Beijing itself. But we can give $200 billion to the Ukraine because we're the world reserve currency. We're the United States. Not cool. And I think these are the ramifications. These are the consequences that are happening as a result of it. And that's why I say, is this too stupid to be stupid? I mean, is it really? Are they that dumb to not think it's going to piss everybody off and make them seek alternatives? And after you told them we're going green, which is the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, we don't need you, Saudi. Thank you for the memories, but we're going a different direction. Really? Are you that stupid?
Yeah.
So when you talk about, and then letting the country fall apart, are you that stupid?
Yeah.
Open borders, elections, judicial system, on and on and on. Really? So
yeah, like I would argue too, like if they were to say we're going green, and by the way, we have for the last couple of years since he got in, 8 new nuclear reactor projects had begun per year. You go, oh, they're really doing it. But A, what's the likelihood of there being 8 new nuclear projects developed?
France just mothballed every single one they have. Every one, they've closed them all. So you're right. And what did Biden do? When he raised the debt ceiling the last time, you know how he did that? He pillaged there was on the East Coast, there was a strategic oil reserve on the East Coast that was built like during Hurricane Sandy or whatever. Because the East Coast got ravaged by it, and he mothballed, took all the oil and sold it to give money to boost up the debt ceiling so we can give it to the Ukraine. And in that deal, he said it can never be filled up again. I mean, are you kidding me?
It's not.
The things that we are doing are just absolutely ridiculous.
I can't say it enough. This is an eye opener, and a lot of our crowd is Canadian, and this wraps back to Miles Franklin. We're trying to get this out to not just Americans, because Canadians fall into this as well. Everyone's going to be affected, especially in the West, if they're not taking heed of what's happening. And Canada's, I would argue, even worse. We dumped all our gold years ago. Like, we don't even, the Canadian government doesn't even have any, and they certainly won't promote it. So this is a chance for not only my subscribers, but the Canadian crowd to go, listen, you can call Miles Franklin. You've got a subsidiary to work with here. There's a solution. And there's the case for the physical rather than the ETF as well, which we didn't even get into. But yeah, the more people hear this, I think it, like you said, it's that cookie. A lot of people know something's wrong. Something's up. Something's not, even if they don't follow finance, don't follow markets, they know something's not right. This is all not adding up. But when you look at it under this lens, you go, wait, this is actually very disturbing and frightening and kind of adding up.
Well, you're right. And thank you for that. And, the FDIC says there are 900 banks that are distressed and 350 that are terminal, basically. And I'm going to ask you a question. You live in Vancouver, and I've been there enough to know that the real estate market, even if it's cooling down, is expensive there. You have to have a lot of money to have a nice house. So would a $4.5 million house be out of the question in Vancouver proper?
No.
Of course not, right?
Yeah,
that's
nothing.
Canadian,
Yeah.
4.5 million Canadian, because check this out. When you talk about what's going to happen to the banks, right? The commercial real estate problem. Think about this for one moment as we put this in context. The former One AT&T Center in St. Louis, the third tallest building in all of St. Louis. It sold for $205 million in 2006. It just recently sold for $3.6 million US, which is 4.6 or 7 Canadian. So you too can have a 44-story tall office building in downtown St. Louis for the low price of 3.6 million US. Forget about the fact it was sold for 205 million in 2006. When you talk about the breadth of what is happening and is
Yes.
not really getting any attention, it's extraordinary. And these are the kinds of things that are happening. And it's just beginning. The Holiday Inn Express in Washington, D.C., it still has $83 million owed to it, and they went bankrupt. And loans for commercial real estate in the United States are what's called non-recourse. Here are the keys. Goodbye. You can't sue me. It's a corporation. So we just leave. So there was an auction for it, right? It still has $83 million owed to it. The only bidder was the lender in the foreclosure auction. They paid $18.5 million for it. So they're still owed 83 million. They got 18.5 out of it. Well, what happens to that lender when they just basically write off $70 million? How does that happen? How does it happen that a real estate investment trust paid 205 million in 06 and just sold it for 3.6 million here, you know, because I thought real estate always went up.
Yes.
And so when you talk about what could happen, the ramifications of the banks that are hanging on by a thread that triggers, you know, people don't even know what bank bail-ins are that were written into law in the Dodd-Frank Act. They'd freak out if they read that.
Yes.
If you two out there don't know what a bank bail-in is, Google bank bail-in / Dodd-Frank Act and get ready to freak out. The point of it is that this is just beginning. And, you know, God bless guys like you who have the courage to have a platform to talk about this stuff. I am a patriot. I love my country. I'm the least likely cast of characters to have ever succeeded in what I have. I owe so much to this country, and it absolutely destroys me to see what's happening to it. And, you know, I wish I looked at the world a little bit differently. It would be a much easier existence for me to not, you know, look, there's a fine line these days, I guess, between pessimism and realism. I am not a pessimistic guy. I think I just see what's happening and others don't. And I'm not trying to sound holier than thou. This is what I focus on every day. And I wonder, why don't people see this?
Yeah.
And I look around and I'm like, oh, well, that's why, because the amount of research I do every single day, digging in websites all around the world, in Russia, in the Middle East, in India, or all throughout the internet, reading things that no one would ever find unless they really tried to find the truth. That's why. And the majority of the people that we care about and love about will be run over by this because they won't acknowledge it until after it happens. But if you look the little by little, I call it logarithmic decay, little by little, bang, all at once, going over the cliff.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. The pitch is slowly going down.
The boiling the frog analogy.
Yes.
Yeah. We're getting boiled. Yeah. And
started out lukewarm. That's right.
Yes. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up patriotism, because that's something that is very divisive, and it shouldn't be. I mean, I'm baffled that there's any argument that there shouldn't be patriotism for one's own country. But I see the argument being, well, maybe I shouldn't buy gold because if the Chinese are doing it and these BRIC nations, I don't want to seem like I'm not being patriotic to be supporting what they're doing. And my argument would be, no. Up until very, very lately, it would be patriotic to actually be buying gold, and that the course that we should be on is over here. We've been led astray, and we've been taking down a totally different one. So in fact, you're not being disreputable or not patriotic. You're actually being patriotic if you look at gold.
Yeah, I mean, look, it just goes to show how divergent we are from the roots in the history of our country, where the Constitution says no money shall be created other than species, which is gold and silver. And, you know, I mean, I think self-preservation is just as patriotic as anything. If you're not here, you can't fight the good fight. If you are not a contrarian, I don't think we should confuse patriotism and contrarianism. You can be a patriot, but believe in contrarian philosophy as it pertains to economic and monetary policy. Because if you're not a contrarian, you're going to be a victim.
Yeah.
And if you are fully invested in dollars, you're destined to go broke. I do mean that. You can still love the hell out of your country, but rue the direction that the representatives, quote unquote, of our democracy, quote unquote, are leading us down a very bad path. And so I don't think that patriotism and realism have to be mutually exclusive. I think that they're not. I mean, they're real. And, you know, that's, um, it's something that bothers me because that's the brainwashing of the American public, the psyche that says, you know, the mantra that all roads to retirement are paved with mutual funds and stock certificates in US dollars. Well, fine. It's easy to say that since 1982, interest rates have fallen at a 45-degree angle, creating the greatest bull market in real estate, stocks, and bonds the world's ever seen. But what happens if it goes the other way? And so really the problem is the suppression of interest rates, which has created distortions. But what happens if the world says, no, no, can't do that anymore when you have $200 trillion in debt and
Yes.
nobody wants to buy your treasuries anymore to finance that debt? So how do you pay for a country that's addicted to spending? $1 trillion in debt every 100 days we're accumulating. $100 billion in interest payments every 100 days we're accumulating. Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to buy our 10-year treasury paying 5% or just under? Are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
There's so many better things to do that don't have the default risk, the inflation risk, the confiscation risk, all of it. And so it's reaching a point where we have nothing left to do but to print money to buy our own bonds, which is monetization of the debt, which is Weimar Republic. It's hyperinflation. Is that what's coming? My guess is we're on the cusp of stagflation, and God forbid hyperstagflation, which is little or no economic growth characterized by higher taxes and higher inflation. What does Biden want to do if he's reelected? And what does your knucklehead want to do? Raise capital gains to 66%?
Yep.
Well, Biden wants to raise them to 44.5%. He wants to impose unrealized capital gains on anyone with over 100 million in assets. Well, these are the people that are job creators. They're the wealthy ones. They'll just pick up tent and leave and go sit on their yacht in the middle of the Caribbean somewhere and say, screw you. I'm not paying that. And so higher taxes, higher inflation, and little or no economic growth in a world where rates are rising and inflation is strangling people's ability just to make ends meet. That's stagflation. And hyperstagflation is when the rest of the world says, we don't want your dollars anymore, and we're not taking it for oil, and then God forbid. So yeah, are these things a possibility? Sure. Do I come across as a doom and gloomer and a buzzkill? Probably, but I'm not. I mean, I grew up in a house, my parents were hippies. I grew up learning to respect anyone, whatever you did. I don't, drugs, sex, and rock and roll never bothered me. And if that's what you want to do, great, cool.
Yep.
You know, I was a jock growing up in a hippie house, but I'm okay with all of it. And what I'm saying is that, you know, this is not something that I am hoping for.
No,
I have a very open mind on everything. What I am seeing is leading me down a pathway of being doom and gloom, because there's a fine line between pessimism and realism. Wake up, open your eyes. And if you don't see what we are doing, you're missing the point completely and totally altogether. You're missing the point of what is happening to this great country. So I think it is actually patriotic to push back against the notion of buying into the lie, buying into the system, push back by, you know, like these states in America. There's 13 states that have just, you know, they're removing capital gains taxes on precious metals, and they're actually putting them in their state constitution to be used for all debts, public and private, including paying your property taxes. That's not unpatriotic. It's giving their constituents the ability to push back against the idiocy in Washington, the brain dead monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, and the ludicrous fiscal policy of the government that thinks it's okay to create $1 trillion in debt and borrow most of it to give to other countries to fight wars that we should have nothing to do with. And, you know, I'll give you an example. One last example here, that there's this idiot in the House of Representatives, and he is the Senate Minority Leader. His name is Hakeem Jeffries. And I mean, you can't make it up, really, how stupid this guy is. But see if I have it. I read something and I almost fell off my chair because it really underscores a lot of the things that I have just talked about with you. So to me, this is everything that is wrong with the United States. So I'm going to read this to you.
Yeah.
The U.S. may have to deploy troops to the Ukraine if Kiev suffers a complete collapse against Russia, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has warned in an interview with CBS News released on Sunday. The senior Democratic lawmaker suggested that if Kiev cannot win the war with Russia using billions of dollars worth of U.S. military aid, Washington could potentially have to intervene directly in the conflict. Okay, here's point number one, how stupid this dude is. Now, I am not a chauvinist at all, not even 1% chauvinistic, right? But what I'm going to say, I just want you to hear it in the spirit that I intend it to be, right? When I think of military and war, I don't think of women. That's not the first thing I think of, right?
Yeah.
So here's what he says. And you can't make this crap up. We can't let Ukraine fall, because if it does, then there's a significant likelihood that America will have to get into the conflict, not simply with our money, but with our service women and our service men. I mean, come the hell on already, man. Can we just stop this woke stupidity and insulting nonsense of just talking like idiots? And then he goes on to say, now, I will grant this, that Marjorie Taylor Greene is a lightning rod, but she's a patriot, right?
Yeah.
He says, Jeffries said, meanwhile, Jeffries claimed that U.S. efforts to support the Ukraine, including pushing a new $61 billion assistance package through Congress. Remember, we're broke. We're insolvent. We are borrowing $1 trillion a month, but we want to push this 61 billion through Congress, she says, has been stymied by what he called a pro-Putin faction within the Republican Party. He signaled out Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now I'm going to enter who has the audacity, who was called for funds to be used for domestic needs rather than the Ukraine. How
dare you,
Marjorie Taylor Greene, to want to fix our infrastructure, which is crumbling, protect our border, which stopped the fentanyl from pouring in, and the 12 million people entering illegally, to strengthen our country. God forbid we do that. Instead, let's give it to the Ukraine on top of the 140 billion we've already given them. I mean, the stupidity, the idiocy, the things that, I mean, if this doesn't make you see what I'm talking about, I'm not a pessimist or a doom and gloomer. This is exactly what I'm talking about, and it is everything that is wrong with this country. And what do you do? What do you do?
Well, I mean, you do have the solution. I mean, the gold is the solution for the individual. I would hearken. And there's lots of, like you said, thousands of interviews that you have on milesfranklin.com, where you get into all of these aspects as well. So, you know, and I'm sure in different angles and in different ways. But I think I would urge people to listen to this a couple times and check out a couple of the other videos as well, because it's going to sink in. It has to. And even if you could, you know, I always try to be as middle of the road as I can, to take away the inflammatory, which side you're on, just take that away and just go look at these actions objectively and tell me, does any of this make sense? Like, you know, and don't like listen to the talking heads on CNN or Fox. Just look at it and go, does this make sense? And most people will go, none of this makes sense. What is happening? And yet every day, almost every day, it's clown world of something new that I go, I can't believe it. Like, holy cow, every day.
Yeah, well, and get ready, because you have the big BRICS meeting in October and the election in November, and it ain't going to stop. And while I do need to run here pretty quick, I've had 6 podcasts and I got another one here in 1 minute. I'm going to have to run, but I would love to come back on your show again. It's an honor to talk to someone like yourself who understands it and has the courage to say it and to get it out. Anytime you'd be kind enough to have me back, I would love to come and be part of this. And I'll be back in Vancouver in January for the VRIC conference, and maybe I'll get to see you and buy a good Canadian beer and sit down and talk in person. But in the meantime, I'd love to pick up where we left off and continue this dialogue. It's amazing how fast an hour and 15 minutes can go by. But I do appreciate you having me. It's wonderful to be here. It's great to meet you, and I'd like to pick up where we left off and continue this conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Andy Schectman. milesfranklin.com. Really appreciate it. Have the rest of a great day and meetings. We really appreciate your time. Yeah, one last thing, and I'll let you go. Info@milesfranklin.com. That's the best way to reach us with any questions or to receive, if you're in the United States, our very, very ultra competitive price list, which we do not publish. mfbullion.ca for the Canadian folks that want to purchase precious metals. Very, very dear friend of mine that runs that site. MF as in Miles Franklin, mfbullion.ca. And reach out with any questions that you've heard on this
podcast or anything else on your mind, or just to ask for the US based price sheet in Canada, mfbullion.ca. And we do have a very, very big Brink storage program, precious metal, singular, precious metal storage.net, preciousmetalstorage.net. Check that out. They're all in Canada. Some of them are in Canada, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. And I'll let you run, man. Thanks again.
you,
And
Andy.
I appreciate it and look forward to chatting with you again real soon.
Excellent. A great wake up call. We really appreciate you.
You got it, brother. Stay well.
Take care.